And now, Deborah Kobylt Live.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on Deborah Kobylt Live. And joining me from New York City is clinical psychoanalyst, Dr. Thomas Jordan. Thanks for joining us, Doctor.
Thank you for inviting me, Deborah.
Fantastic book you wrote, Learn to Love, a guide to healing your disappointing love life. That's just a great title right there. How can you not pick up this book, right? So many of us have had disappointing love lives. We know people who have them. And this is just a way to sort of look at your own love life, what's going right, what's going wrong, and honestly, how to break some bad habits, right, Doctor?
Absolutely. That's the
Yeah.
problem. We learn
Yeah.
things about love that are unhealthy.
I mean, everybody knows that you learn a lot of that when you're a little kid, right? How you grew up. But a lot also happens through our lives where we learn some bad behaviors as well, right?
Right.
So maybe we ought to take it to the top. Why did you write this book in the first place?
Two reasons. One, in my practice, I've seen a lot of people who are repeating love life difficulties over and over again, multiple disappointments. In many cases, getting to the point of resignation that they were never going to have love in their lives again. So I started collecting information, taking a look. What's causing this, right? The other reason is in my own personal love life, I made some changes that produced a love relationship. I've been married for 27 years. I have a kid. And I wanted to put those two together and come up with a book that people could read and as a guidebook and make some real permanent changes in their love life experience.
What do you think? This is a sort of a loaded question, but what do you think is one of the main issues plaguing couples today?
Um, Repeating what they've learned about love relationships in their lives and not knowing that they're doing so. And oftentimes, what happens is if you've learned something unhealthy about love relationships, uh, unconsciously it can repeat in your love life. You find partners that match up with what was learned that's unhealthy, and then you have an unhealthy relationship. And the disappointments stack up one after the other. And if you're not aware of what you've learned, these things can consume a whole life. So it's a very tragic issue when you're repeating something in your love life you're not aware of.
Look, very often we meet someone, right? It's like, oh my God, that person is the person. We're in that honeymoon phase, and there's
Yep.
nothing that that person can do wrong. Especially like if you meet somebody younger, you get married and you're younger, and you grow and you change. That to me is a big issue, right? I'm not even sure how people, I've been married a long time, but generally, I think it's difficult sometimes because we change or we change back into who we really were in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think the love relationship is a wonderful place to learn and grow if you're receptive to it. Because it's an extremely intimate relationship, you're going to hear some things from the person you love that could help you think about the issues that you need to change to keep the relationship healthy over time. Unfortunately, people can get defensive, and when they get defensive, they're not open to learning, and that's a problem.
Well,
Uh,
you have to go for therapy with your partner. What if you've got a partner who won't go and says, I'm not the problem? Then what do
Happens
you
all
do?
the time. Happens all the time. The book is also written for people who are out of a difficult relationship and need to think about what their psychological love life is about. And I make a big deal about that in the book, that we
Hmm.
all have a psychological love life. That's the blueprint of what we expect and how we behave and how we feel in our love relationships from the inside out. And it's very
Hmm.
important to know that you have a psychological love life because that's where permanent, real change takes place in a person's love life. Otherwise, repetition becomes a problem. When you've learned something, repetition is always the problem. You're not aware of what you've learned, you can repeat it over and over again. I can't tell you how many times I've sat with someone who's told me they've learned something unhealthy, either a parent abandoned or they had an abusive experience when they were a child, and then they found abusive partners over and over and over again that
Hmm.
replay that scenario again and again. And the only way to really break that pattern is to become aware of it. And that's the psychological love life. What we've learned, what relationship experiences have taught us in our own individual life, stored in our unconscious memory that gets replayed in our love life over and over again.
It's interesting you said that. I went to dinner with a very, very close friend of mine who's twice been divorced just this week. And she's always telling me that her parents were like the love of each other's lives and they couldn't stop touching each other and blah, blah, blah. And I would sit across from her and think, and how come all your relationships are kind of going wrong? I mean, she often wonders, like, I didn't learn this because I grew up with I don't know, parents who enjoyed each other. So what do you say about something like that?
Well, I would keep an open mind and keep asking questions because I'm a little suspicious.
Hmm.
If you've had two divorces, I would think a little bit like maybe you're finding the wrong partners. Maybe you've learned something you don't know you've learned. See, when I said the word unconscious, that's a little bit of an important word. The other important word is the familiar. The root of the word familiar is family. What we learn becomes familiar, and we don't see any problem with it. We can replicate it over and over again. I've sat with people in an initial interview that have said to me they've had 3 abusive relationships or 3 relationships with unavailable people. And if you look at their earlier life, there was an abandonment or neglect, but they don't associate the two. It's like, I seem to be gravitated towards this type of person. Yes, the reason for that is there's a similarity with what you experienced earlier in life. So the problem is consciousness, becoming aware of what we've learned. It's not easy sometimes. People can get very defensive. People often say to me, well, I learned in my family of origin, that's good enough. I don't need to question anything. I don't need to ask any questions. That I'll just do what I learned growing up. It's a little bit more important to work on our love lives and become aware of what we've learned.
Hmm. Let's go through a couple of the chapters, shall we? Briefly. Part 1, you talk about the unhealthy love life, my love life research, and learning about love relationships. What is an unhealthy love life?
An unhealthy love life is when we've learned something unhealthy earlier in life and we replicate it unconsciously over and over again, staying in a pattern that's familiar but unhealthy. And I listed 10 unhealthy relationship experiences: abandonment, abuse, excessive control, dependency, neglect, self-centeredness. When you're exposed to a lot of that growing up and it gets into your psychological love life, it's very easy to replicate unconsciously what you've learned in the choice of partner, how you behave in a love relationship. And so these patterns can get reenacted again and again and again, resulting in an unhealthy love life.
I love how you say that because a lot of people, as you know, to your point, probably don't realize that they're repeating a behavior that is unhealthy, such as I know we talked earlier about control. A lot of people like to take control of a relationship, right? And I'm going to
Yes.
guess that maybe growing up, their life was out of control. What do you say about
Or there
that?
was too much control. Or
Mm,
there was too much control. In chapter 5, I talk about my own psychological love life as an example of the kind of application of my unlearning method. I myself, I grew up with a woman mother who was dependent and controlling. And I expected that the way it influenced my love life, my psychological love life, is I expected women to be dependent and controlling. And I not only found people who were dependent and controlling, but in some cases, I expected them to be dependent and controlling when they weren't. It was dominating my love life experience and predicting the kind of relationships I would have. And when my own analyst back in the 90s pointed that out to me, I was able to disengage myself from it. I became aware of the pattern and I moved it in another direction, which in the book I talk about shifting it away from what we've learned. And I found that independent, not controlling woman to marry.
I'm
But that
glad
was
you're
something
able,
my mother never taught me.
but you were very close to mom though throughout your life, nonetheless, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was her confidant.
Yeah, that's wonderful. But you were willing and open to change. That's the thing, right? Where you realized where you needed to shift your own behavior. How do you do that? How do you teach someone to do that if they have 20, 30, 40, or more years of doing things a certain way?
Yes. Well, the first
That's
step
tough.
is, yeah, it's tough always because these patterns can be habits, as you mentioned earlier. Habits mean it's learning performed over and over again. It becomes familiar. We do it repetitively. The first step is always to identify what's in the psychological love life. Who taught you about love relationships? How were you taught? Which relationship experiences were there? And, you know, the motivation to do that often occurs in middle age when people get to their 30s, 40s, and 50s and have experiences in their love life where they can look back and say, you know, that was pretty painful. That was very disappointing. I don't want to repeat that again. So that kind of readiness to look at one's love life is an important step. So you can invite a person to look at what they've learned about love relationships. That's always step one. Step two is to strengthen a person's ability to become aware of how this pattern replicates so that you can start interfering with it. It's an automatic thing. It likes to replicate unconsciously. So once you become empowered to challenge that pattern, to become aware of the kind of relationships you usually end up in, the kind of people you usually get attracted to, you can begin to ask questions about that, emphasize the unhealthy aspects of it, and strengthen the ability to challenge ourselves not to repeat the same thing over and over again. And the last step is to realize moving in the opposite direction is really an opportunity to do something better. For example, if you're brought up in a home where unfortunately there were experiences of neglect that got into your love life and you're finding unavailable partners that have a difficulty committing, it's an opportunity to realize, okay, I have to be sensitive to the issue of commitment and emotional availability. Ask questions about it, be aware of it in dating situations, for example. And that kind of sensitivity begins to move the love life in a healthier direction.
Can you give us some tools? Like, let's say I'm sitting down with you, or I'm sitting down with you with my partner. What are tools? Like, do you give homework? Like, Deborah, this week, this is what you're doing, or this month, this is your challenge. Like, how do you get somebody to shift their perspective and their way of doing things?
Yeah, you're talking about couple or marital therapy primarily, I think. Two people in the room, right? The first and basic principle, as far as I'm concerned, in the way I practice marital or couple therapy, is communication. You invite people to talk about their emotional needs, their experience of being together. Communication's difficult usually at the beginning because there's a lot of hurt. There may be a breakdown in communication and the couple needs to talk through the therapist. You know, you talk to one person, talk to the other, mending the bridge of communication between the two of them. As that bridge mends and people can talk to each other, now the therapist has an opportunity to take a look at what those learned patterns may have been for each individual in the relationship. And when you become aware of what your psychological love life has in it, and you become aware of what your partner's psychological life has in it, love life has in it, now you can take a look at how you were attracted to each other, if there's any unhealthy patterns that get replayed between the two of you. And what's really beautiful about that is you're moving into a phase of what I like to think of as working on your relationship psychologically. You're participating in a shared experience. You're saying, you know, I love you, but I don't relate to you the right way. I relate to you in a way that's unhealthy. You love me, but you relate to me in a way that's unhealthy as well. Let's make corrections in the relationship that we establish with each other so we can take better care of the love that we feel for each other.
But do you give people homework, whether individual therapy or couples therapy? Like, Deborah, you need to work on this. And here's the homework that you need to do so that you can change this particular behavior. Like, is there something that you give people? Because I think it's hard to change people's behavior. I really do, especially over a certain age. It's almost like dieting, right? Like, you might be okay for the first week or two or even a month, but then you start going back you slip back into your old ways.
Well, the reason why, therapy can be important because you have people in a situation where you can repeat messages to people over and over again about what they're doing that's healthy or unhealthy. I think that what you're talking about, homework, is organically formulated in a really good couples treatment because people when people participate in formulating the homework, it's better than if the therapist says, you do this, you do that, you do this. So I
I
look
see.
for opportunities where the patient says, how come I expect him to act like my mother acts? And then I jump in and say, that's something you really have to watch. You have to look at that. You have to think about that. And so next session, chances are she comes in with memory, reflection on what that issue involves. Oh, I remember when my mother and my father had this kind of interaction or that kind of interaction. So it fills out organically. And the process, the homework becomes a part of the session to session experience that people have and take with them between sessions.
Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting. Your psychological love, changing your psychological love life. We were talking about that. We talked also about your life and your mom, and then having a terrific relationship with your wife. Treatments, right? Educating your love life. Short-term learning of unlearned methods. Love life consultations. That's chapter 6. That's something that I'd like to go through a little bit. If you could just tell our audience. Because I want them to really pick up this book, because I think it's really filled. It's not hard to read, guys. It's not a giant sized book, but it's packed with great information. Do you want to go through that a little bit? Treatments for your love life?
Yes, a love life consultation. My wife and I are offering love life consultations to people who've read the book and would like a little support applying what we call the unlearning method in the book. And the unlearning method is geared to inviting people into the process of identifying what's in their psychological love life. So that's what the consultation process does. And in many cases, it may take about 3 or 5 sessions to really focus people on what they've learned, so you can introduce them to the idea that they have to unlearn something to improve their love life. So you take them through the stages. You identify what's going on, the process of unlearning or challenging what's happening so they can see it, become aware of it, and then conceptualize what the healthier opposites would be, so they can have something in mind as a goal to move toward. If you've learned control growing up and you realize that control is really a negative thing to do in a relationship, it breaks down the love experience, it interferes, it's unhealthy, then you become sensitized to the issue of control and understanding how it shows up and how you need to really move into a freeing kind of feeling in a love relationship. People love you because they're free to love you, not because you make them love you.
You know what? You could see, though, how control develops, right? I'll give an example in my own life. If I ask somebody to take out the garbage and it's still piled high and just stuff is a mess, nothing I caused, and I ask once or twice or 3 times, and then it doesn't happen, and then people get irritated, and then they take it out in other ways. How do you not do that if the person still decides not to take out the garbage, but you're irritated? Do you know what I mean? And then you start... That's a common one. I know that's a common one.
Let's work with that. See, instead of repeatedly asking for it, that leads to frustration. You ask once, you ask twice, that's the time for a conversation. Conversation is different than asking someone to do something. Conversation is, excuse me, I'm asking you to put out the garbage and you're ignoring me. Is there a reason for that?
Right. And then the answer usually is, I forgot. And then it's like, well, I asked a couple times. Well, I don't remember. And that's always the answer. And sometimes this happens in my house, by the way. So I want people to realize that, like, they're not alone. So I'll get the garbage, I'll take it out, I'll put it by the front door. What happens? Walks around it. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm really, and then it's like, whoa, I'm distracted. It's like, well, I'm distracted too, but I'll take the trash out. And then I start to get irritated, and then my behavior toward him will change, and then he'll get irritated because of that. And it's like it keeps snowballing.
Exactly. But I don't think he's revealed the reason why he's not taking out the garbage yet. The reason he's not taking it out, in my opinion, is because he doesn't see it as something he should do. And now, getting to that point, in my mind, would be making the conversation real. And if he said, I don't know, and wouldn't go there, I would offer him the reason as a suggestion. Maybe you think taking out the garbage shouldn't be on your job description, living under this roof with me. Is that true? So
and then I would hear, no, here's the answer I'd get. I don't mind. I just forgot. It's like, it's always the same answer. Like, I might have
Okay,
just pressed a little tape
so
recorder
take
and
it
go,
out now. Right. And
I
let's
will,
see how
I
you
will,
do tomorrow.
I will in a minute. That's what I mean. Like, that's why I was asking, what if somebody just sort of isn't changing their behaviors and then you end up irritated and then you keep going down that hole? I think that's very dangerous. So how does, let's
Yes.
say, how would I stop going down the hole? If you're, let's say the person's irritated, but they don't want to keep snowballing. What would you suggest for me?
Yes, I think that motivation to do something is a very important factor in this. Taking out the garbage might not have a lot of motivation attached to it. Improving your love life, now we're on a different level.
There you
And
go.
if you've had painful experiences with your spouse, with girlfriends, with boyfriends, with a husband, I think that motivates people to say, okay, this has been painful, and
Right.
I don't want to recreate that hurt and pain. That gives what I'm doing leverage, because now I can remind people how painful it was. I can ask people to review experiences where they get the feeling of how painful it was. They become more open to the possibilities under those circumstances. So
Right.
this is a little bit different when you talk about something as motivating as having a better love life.
Yeah, but it all sort of works together, doesn't it? Because ultimately we're responsible to how we react to the other person, whether it's one's love life or because I think ultimately comes down to respect, regardless of what it is, whether it's one's
Mm.
personal and intimate love life or whether it's, I don't know, taking out the trash. I think in a way it's all together, no?
Respect. When you say respect, what do you mean? Respect. How does that in your, what are you referring to?
For all of us to respect the other person's needs. And by the
I
way,
see.
I'm not saying I do that all the time, please. But don't you think? Because very often if people are having issues, they're thinking of themselves and maybe not the other person. Am I
Yes.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not a therapist, so I'm just asking if
No,
that's
no,
true.
no. Self-centeredness is one of those experiences that can be replicated in a love
Yeah.
relationship in a very painful way, where you don't feel like your personal needs are being considered by the other person as much as they should be. That can be very difficult. If a person's been exposed to self-centeredness growing up, it's very easy to replicate self-centeredness in a love life by finding self-centered partners. Um, it's not easy to change self-centeredness when that's what you've learned. Not easy at all. Um,
Hmm.
if that's what you bring into a love relationship, when you learn from these unhealthy relationship experiences, you can reenact them in two different ways. You can find people who are neglectful, self-centered, abusive, rejecting, or you can be abusive, rejecting, neglectful yourself. And in people's love lives, I've discovered that learning can go in either one of those directions. Sometimes both. I found people who set up neglect in one relationship and then find a neglectful partner in the next relationship. So, whether you find partners who are unhealthy and bring that unhealthiness into your life, or you yourself are bringing it in, either one. Self-centeredness, I have that on the list, but it's a very
Yeah.
difficult relationship style, so to speak, to correct. Um, these things have to be practiced. That's why I call stage 3 of my unlearning method practice. Once you become aware of something that you're doing in your love life is unhealthy, I'm not saying, okay, boom, it's done. You've learned it. It's over. No, you've repeated something for many years. Now you've got to repeat something healthier. So it takes practice and it takes reminders. And that's one way in which therapy can be useful for people who need the support to do that, because a therapist will become aware of what the patient is practicing and give reminders and reaffirm what's going on and follow it as it begins to change over time. For some people, it takes a while.
I would imagine. Now, let's say you've been burned, right? And you haven't had so many healthy relationships, but you're getting out there again. You want to try dating. What should you look for? Let's say you've had some therapy, but you're almost worried because you haven't had so much success. Is there something to
Yes,
look for or patterns you should look for the first few
right.
dates?
Yes, you're talking about 50% of my practice or more.
Ooh.
People who've been burned, who've been divorced, haven't dated for a while, or now are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s and hesitant, thinking they might replicate a painful relationship, a toxic relationship that happened earlier. This is a wonderful time to work on your love life. And what I mean again with that is to understand what's in your psychological love life, what blueprint was involved in these previous relationships that were toxic, identifying it so that now that you begin to go into the dating world, you can be aware of what you don't want to replicate and what you need to do to make your love life healthier. So
Mm.
basically, you're keeping an eye on the psychological love life to make sure it doesn't replicate an unhealthy pattern. And what I do in treatment with people like this is I encourage, help them define what's in their psychological love life, help them develop the sensitivity to being able to check which partner is a better partner, who should I select, reporting on first dates. How did the first date go? Was there any evidence of that unavailability emotionally that you encountered in a previous relationship? So you're strengthening the person's ability to become. It's sort of like taking charge of your own love life and
Mm.
moving it in a direction that you recognize is different than what happened previous, and it's healthier. And it's very gratifying when a person comes back and says, I think I've met someone that really is better for me. And sometimes people say to me, I was a little afraid of what was unfamiliar. But now that I'm spending some time with somebody a little different than who I would usually be attracted to, I can see more opportunity in this relationship. And so it's a wonderful thing to witness. It's people
How,
reconstructing their love lives.
how about love after a certain age? You've been divorced, you're middle age, you're over 50, let's say, even over 60, older people. Is it difficult for them to sort of pivot their thinking and find a partner that they could spend the rest of their lives with?
Always difficult, but I'm an extreme optimist.
Me too.
And when a patient comes into my practice at 60 years of age or more, they sense my optimism. Because I'm talking about learning, you can learn at any point in life if you're motivated to do so. That's number one. And if you've been practicing something for a while and it's proven to be detrimental to your love life, okay, we're going to realize that this is going to be a little bit tough. It's going to be like, you're rolling something up a hill a little bit. But with the right kind of dialogue about it, with the inspiration that comes from being motivated to do something better in their love lives, I've seen and worked with older people that have actually done something different. See, the key is to do something different in your love life. When something hasn't worked and you've done it over and over again, and now you're taking a hiatus, like, okay, I'm not going to, love's too complicated. I'm resigned to living without love. And then you get to the point where you think, maybe I should get back into the love life area, but I'm too afraid. That the important step is to do something different. If you do the
Mm-hmm.
same thing over and over again, you're going to get the same result. If you do
Mm-hmm.
something different, that's better. I became aware of a lot of people, Deborah, who are resigned to living without love as a consequence of my
Mm.
website. I have a website, lovelifelearningcenter.com. I put it up 2012. I wanted it to be a library of real articles about love life stuff, like the real articles that would help people find and sustain a healthy love life, healthy love relationship. So at one point, I wrote an article a few years back called Living Without Love in Your Life. And boy, did I get an education as a consequence of that post. Lots of people sent me commentary. I read them. I even revised the post a couple of times from what I learned from people when they responded to my first post. And I learned from that post that there are a lot of people who've given up on love. And
Oh.
I think it's tragic to do that, to feel like love is so hurtful, so out of control, so unable to be managed that I'm going to stay away from it. My personal belief, my work tells me that they don't know what they've learned about love relationships and just assume it's going to repeat over and over again. And there's some truth in that. But the way out is to believe and understand that if I learn what I've learned about love relationships and can challenge it, look at it, change it, unlearn what I've learned, my love life will move into a different direction. You know, we work on every other area of our lives, right?
That's right.
Our work life, our financial life, our emotional life. We don't work on our love lives, do we? Maybe
no,
not.
You're right about that. It just sort of, it's on autopilot, right? You just sort of assume it's there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And repeating mistakes that's why I think repeating love life disappointments and the resignation that can show up after you've done a number of those repetitions, I think is the biggest love life problem going. In fact, the 50% divorce rate, I think, is related to this. You know, 50% means chance. You marry with a 50% chance that there'll be a divorce or there'll be an enduring relationship. I think that 50% exists because people aren't necessarily knowing what they've learned about love relationships and repeating them as a consequence, divorce or separation.
Oh my gosh, there's so much that we could be talking about, but I want to make sure people know to pick up this book, Learn to Love, the guide to healing your disappointing love life. I think there's so much in this book for people to learn. Also, you do virtual counseling as well, don't you?
Yes, I do. I do virtual counseling, telehealth counseling, love life consultations. Absolutely. On my website is my email address, my wife's email address, as well as our phone numbers if people are interested.
Right, because your wife works with you as well, right?
Yeah,
That's
she's
great.
a clinical social worker analyst, right?
I love this. You can analyze each other. It's like, well, now Thomas. It's like, well, wait a minute. You know, you could just analyze one another. So I'm being silly there, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, you know, I can't be a doctor in my marriage, and my wife can't be a therapist. We found that out at the beginning. You know, we just have to be open to each other and go through the stages of being open and honest and work at communicating. Like everybody else.
like you're just like everybody else. That's exactly right.
Absolutely.
With a few more answers. That's all I'd like to say.
Okay.
So please, everybody, pick up this book, Learn to Love, and also they can look you up on your website. Give a shout out again to that, please.
LoveLifeLearningCenter.com.
I think you're terrific. I really do. And I've enjoyed very much reading the book and very much talking to you. And thank you for being patient. At the beginning of our show, we had some technical issues, but we worked it out, right?
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah, for inviting me.
Very, very nice to talk to you. All right. So everybody, please pick up the book, Learn to Love, easy to read and a great read too. It might really help you out personally and your relationships. Also look up Dr. Thomas Jordan out of New York City. So we appreciate you joining us today on Deborah Kobylt Live. You can find us on every possible podcast platform. So please look us up, like us, follow us, all the rest. Thanks for being here. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.